to our podcast, Insight Reading Enlightenment, dedicated to sight reading through the lens of historically informed performance practice. And today I have a special guest. Could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Norbert Rodenkirchen, and I'm a medieval flute player who plays normally by heart. So yesterday I had a concert here in Basel based on my program Hamelin Anno 1284, which is a program about the Pied Piper of Hamelin from the perspective of early music. And I prefer not to sight read in most of the situations, but to play extempore, what means that I learn the pieces by heart and improvise on the tunes I learned. So, but I'm very happy now to share some experiences with my flute colleagues here in Basel, and that's why we're here.
And we are happy to have you on our show. Thank you very much. And could you tell us more about the concert that you played yesterday, about the concept, the idea, and the pieces that you have played?
Yeah, the concept of my program is, like I said, it's about the story of the Pied Piper in Hamelin, which is famous as the so-called rat catcher. But my program is focusing on the historic events behind the story and behind also the very famous fairy tale. And I wanted to look at it from the date of the real event, which is in June 1284, so the late 13th century. I wanted to focus on music, which a jocular or a minstrel, traveling musician could have played during that time. And so I came upon the melodies of the Minnesinger Witzlav of Rügen, because he was at the same, more or less the same time, and also more or less the same region where we are talking about, because the events in Hamelin rely to a migration project where we know now that the young people in Hamelin went to the Baltic coast, and so the Pied Piper must have been a musician from there, because he convinced them to go to work in the farms.
And what is the original story, the original fairy tale?
Well, the original story is not the fairy tale. The original story is that 130 young people were convinced by a piper to go with him, and nobody in Hamelin knew where they went. So they disappeared. And from historic research today, we know that there have been lots of activities also in other cities at that time of so-called locators, people who convinced young people to go into rarely settled areas at the Baltic coast where they urgently needed workers in the farms. And so this is a very common phenomenon. It's called the Ostkolonisation, and so it's also for historians it's very clear, and it's not so clear whether the ratcatcher story is seen in that context. But this is also now one of the main theories how to look at the story. And the ratcatcher, that's a mythology which later developed in the 16th century, so much later after the event. And this led to the famous fairy tale that you have somebody who...
I have no idea. Could you please tell us the story?
The story of the ratcatcher. That's the story of the ratcatcher is in the Brothers Grimm fairy tales in the 19th century. That there is in the city of Hamelin, there's a lot of rats. It's a plague. And so there suddenly appears a piper and claims he can help the city to get rid of the problem by just piping the rats into the river. And so when he did, the people refused to pay him. And then next Sunday morning he came back, and then suddenly all the children followed him out of the door, and they disappeared and went to and then they say they went to a cave on a hill and came out on the other side in Romania.
That's a powerful musician, I must say.
Yes, so that's a fairy tale. So and my program was was trying to go behind the story and to see what was really there and what music could fit to it from the perspective of early music.
Yes, and what kind of music did you find?
Well, Witzlaw of von Rügen is really pretty near as regard monody. If you look for monody of the late 13th century or the beginning of the 14th century, then you have at the Baltic coast, the nearest you can get is Witzlaw of Rügen, and even one melody of his teacher called the Ungelater, who must have been pretty much the same age as the Piper in Hamelin. So from this guy, the Ungelater, we have even also one melody. And and at this area, it's a Slavic culture. So we still have folk music from that area, which relates to the summer festivities like solstice dances, like Kupala dances, and this is demons for fertility, for example, and it's of course going back to pagan rites, like rites of spring, and here's the rites of summer, and but this is still active today, and of course the melodies we cannot know how old they really are, but I combined my Pied Piper music, my take on Witzlaw melodies with these Slavic ornaments of the Kupala dances.
How did you research on this subject? How did you find the ornaments? And especially I wanted to ask you about the instruments. Did you research about the instruments that were in use at that time?
Yes. These are two questions. The one is about the Slavic ornaments. Of course, I'm not a Slavic, but a Rhinelander.
I am.
But I have been quite a lot in Poland, and yesterday in the concert I also gave a little instruction how I learned from some Polish musicians, folk musicians, especially in the festival of Jaroslav, where we sometimes had folk sessions, and well, there are people in Poland who do a work maybe similar like Bela Bartok did. They go to the villages and still make recordings of the old people. And I'm happy that I met some of these young people, and this was already 15 years ago, we had some of these jam sessions together. And then there's also one collection of printed music where I heavily rely on, which is a Kolberg collection, but it's from the 19th century, of Slavic ornamented Slavic dance fragments in Poland. And this is
there is
exactly the region where I'm talking about, the Baltic coast, northern Poland or Brandenburg.
I was just thinking immediately, there is also a collection by Lvov and Prach in the 19th century about Russian folk music, but about the songs. It contains the songs.
I would say it's part of the movement of refinding the cultural heritage wherever it. And even this also happened in Germany and in France, that people were collecting fairy tales or old texts and old songs, folk songs. And this is it's pretty unusual that folk songs were written down. Normally they were never written down because it's oral tradition.
I think it was quite late though, because I think there was a conflict with the Orthodox Church when this kind of folk music and instruments, they were considered as something bad and should be destroyed, and you know, we have this problem in Slavic lands with folk music. It's it's terrible.
Well, there's of course interesting instruments especially plucked instruments in East Europe. You have a lot of
which remind of psalterium.
And I don't know now the word for the Russian type of kantele. In Norwegian countries they have this kind of early harp with metal strings. But I forgot now the
Gusli.
And but here with the piper we have another thing that the first sources, they talk about the piper. Then there's one in the 15th century who already says of who talks about the fistula argentorum, which is a fistula is a pipe, a Querpfeife. So like the Schweizer Pfeife in the Carnival here. And so this is the first mention of really that a piper in Hamelin played a traverso, but with something with silver, maybe ornamented with silver or out of silver. We will never know that. But yeah.
Yeah, and about your instruments, which instruments did you bring to Basel, and could you tell about your collection?
Well, I play medieval flutes, which is basically from the form not very different from Renaissance flutes, but it would be unfair to call them Renaissance flute because they are not Renaissance flute. They are the flutes which were used since antiquity until the Renaissance in the same form. But in medieval times, there was one really major difference to a Renaissance flute. They were tuned in a different way, Pythagorean way. That means that they had, according to the church modes or the medieval modes, you didn't need any pure thirds for a nice polyphony of triads or so, because that was not needed. And so it didn't exist in the tuning. So we had Pythagorean tuning with pure fourth and fifths, not to punish anybody, but because it's just the third was not yet detected as a beautiful interval.
It was a dissonance, actually.
It was a dissonance, but it was, of course, it was a differently tuned third, which still today is not really nice. If you have two big whole tones adding up to a big third, this is just a resulting interval which wants to go up to the fourth. No? It wants to resolve. Mm-hmm. It's a dissonance. And so the fourth is much more consonant in the Pythagorean tuning than the third. And the same, another distinguishing or another difference between Renaissance and medieval flute is that it was not organized in families, because it was not meant to be played in families. It was maximum played together in parts of two, like in the Canticas de Santa Maria, you have two flute players, but normally it was played with other instruments or solo or just in other combinations, but not in concerts, because we didn't have concerts in medieval times. It's the Renaissance idea.
There were not so many people.
Oh no, it's just the new development of harmony and of the mean-tone temperament led also to very organically to the idea of organizing sound in families. So it's the same in the choral music, that suddenly you have sopran, alt, tenor, bass. This is the Renaissance way of thinking about sound.
The community.
Yeah, community also, and maybe also have harmony as something which it's maybe something similar to the perspective in painting. That's something like Leonardo da Vinci has, that he has now really nearly photographic like correct perspectives in the music, in the painting, and in the music it's maybe the same with harmony. But here in the medieval time, in 13th century, I use these cylindrical flutes, which I think a fistula or a festula, like it's in the first source, was used, and so that's what I do, and I try to reconstruct a performance of a traveling minstrel at that time.
Was it always flute player playing solo, or you mentioned before that your program contains texts as well? Would be a minstrel also performing some texts in his performance?
I don't know. We don't know so much about that, because we don't know so much about the minstrels or the flute, the instrumentalists at all, because we know that they are there, and they belong to the entourage of minnesingers. No? Or if you see, for example, Wolkenstein, when he says that what a good musician should also be able to play the drums, to play the flutes, and to fiddle, and to sing, and to write poems. Okay.
That's a lot.
Machot in a completely other context also mentioned a lot of instruments which a poet should or at least consider to know. But I think this is not enough to say that we know exactly how there was a multifunctional kind of artist. I don't know. I'm also a bit skeptical about that. In my texts in the program, there were really more informal texts. They were not informal. They were texts who informed the audience about what was going on. So it was not. It was not that this is a kind of performance which needs to be like that. Which claimed that this is a historical performance together with text, but it's a modern format. To go through the centuries
with more understanding.
Yes. So we started with the earliest sources and then went through the centuries, and we ended with the fairy tale of the Brothers Grimm, and then in the postludium we even took a jump over the cultural background of the Western Occident. We went to Persia, to Rumi, who lived at the same time. So we had a poem of Rumi at the end. To make a complete different quote, but it sounded completely organic to do this.
Sounds very interesting. And about your instruments that you used for this performance, I see this big flute in front of us.
This big flute is one which I'm checking out from. I used flutes of different sizes, but not organized as a family, but I had different Pythagoreanly tuned traverso flutes by different makers. Just a collection of what I wanted to have in this program, and not always the same flute, not always the same.
But you were following according to your taste and what you would like to hear.
Yes. I could have also played this on one flute, but then it would have been for an evening of where you also want to be entertained. It would have been a little bit monotonous. But which I also have another program where I exactly want that. It's called TB Extempore, where which I recorded in an abbey, and I play only one flute and I play only one piece. But in this piece are different pieces intertwined, and so I try to do it in nearly like a raga. Mm-hmm. That was my take 20 years ago. I made a record. It's called like this. This also can also be very interesting, but then it's more meditative. Mm-hmm. And the Rattenfänger is the program should be more vielseitig. I don't know the word now. Multifaceted. Yeah.
That's amazing. I just wanted to say that first I heard your performance in Moscow when you performed in a church at the station Kitai-Gorod. It was a big church. And I was so enchanted by the sound of your flute. And then I discovered the earlier flutes that were existing before Baroque times, actually. And it was such a strong experience for me. So I wanted to thank you for opening up this world.
Well, thank you. I also have to thank Moscow, because for me, the 3 times I was in Moscow, I was so moved that there can be such an emotional audience for this kind of music, because I've seen old ladies crying in the first row, and you never have this experience in Köln or so. So it's very moving to go to a place. For us it's pretty far away, and it was a great experience I found also friends there and colleagues which I'm still in contact with.
Do you also work at a contemporary music department somewhere, or do you teach composition?
I work in contemporary contexts, but I don't teach composition. I'm a freelancer. The only thing I did a lot of teaching when I was younger. I taught in music school. I even was in a jazz school for a certain time for young people. I led the jazz combos for youngsters, but this is a long time ago. And so in the moment I only do workshops or special training if somebody wants to know about my experience, I'm happy to share. But I'm not doing this on a regular basis. But I'm maybe 2 or 3 times a year I'm invited to do this, and also at some academies or private people come to me. But most of the times I'm just playing or composing or recording, arranging, doing my stuff. No?
And the last question is, do you think those minstrels, did they sight read music? Were they educated to sight read from manuscripts?
I think it's very hard to say, because probably we had the whole spectrum of what we have today too. If you ask now this same question, and you have one person who plays in a rock band, and the other person has been at a jazz school, yeah. The third person has done some classical violin training and only plays in orchestras, and so these 3 people would give completely 3 different answers to that question. And maybe the guy in the rock band, or the woman in could also be the person in the band, maybe doesn't even read notes, so they arrange the pieces according to a principle what Duke Ellington called the head arrangement. So you just do it while in the process. You say, you play that phrase, and then you play that phrase, and why not having this nice idea? So that's something I like. It's something like a garage band. So I like that principle the most. That's my favorite kind of to work together as a band. And the other approach is that somebody arranges something and the others play it, or that and for the medieval music, it's rarely the case that we have the situation that we need to sight read, because the music in which it has been come to us is not ready to play. So first there needs a process of reading the manuscript and transcribing it into something which we can work on. It's rarely possible, only with some exemptions, that directly read it from the manuscript. And it's also not meant for it, because the manuscripts in Renaissance, they were meant as choir books to read from them. The medieval manuscripts, most of them were not meant for that. They were meant as documentations, maybe for the cantores to remember, but not for the musicians themselves. Mm-hmm. That's one big difference. And so the music in medieval times was very often meant to be memorized and then played extempore, means to have memorized it, and then you know some certain rules how to improve it, how to embellish it, how to change it, to make variations.
There was an idiomatic language for that people knew, the musicians?
In certain places and certain times. So medieval time is a long time. It's longer, the whole medieval time is longer than the end of the medieval time until now. So we're talking about 700 years. So it's a bit difficult to make one rule for this long period of time. But I would say yes, there must have been idioms for certain places and certain time. Whether you're at a court in the 13th century at a certain place with certain teachers, then of course you have this. And of course there's also evidence which can be researched. No? And other places where you don't have evidence. No? But still true is what I said, that the music is in most cases not ready to play. So you either need a modern edition, but why sight read that? It's just a question. I don't know. I have no answer. I would say take the modern edition, okay, but then compare it to the facsimile, then learn it by heart, and then meet the others. Or learn it together. But not, I'm very sorry. I know your theme is sight read, but sight reading starts, I would say, with the existence of choir books, and not before. Before, notation had a completely different meaning. And you know, the most important meaning of notation was a political one. In Carolingian time, the only reason why notation developed in the Occident was that Charlemagne needed a unity in his in his whole area, which covered nearly the whole of today's Europe, and so, or a big part of it. And so everybody sang their liturgy, or sometimes even their pagan songs or secular songs, in a completely different way. And so he wanted to have the liturgy as a unifying factor sung in the same mode. And there were some instructors, music teachers, who helped him to develop this method. And notation was one of their tools. So
it's like printing their own money, or
yes, yeah, and also to have a method that if a music teacher goes from, let's say, Fulda to somewhere in Spain, to Madrid, that they would sing, that he could teach the monks there or the nuns the same method of singing the choral in the right way. And because if the monk would have stayed in Fulda or some other place like Mainz or wherever, Paris, if you stayed there, you don't need the notation because the monks could sing the chorals. They knew it, no? Because it's the daily practice. The main reason was to transport the knowledge to another place. That was notation. Because before, notation was not needed. Yeah. And in other parts of the world, in other times of the world, it was not needed. And this was a trigger for other repertoires over the centuries. And so later, up to Beethoven and Boulez, and so this led to composition. But in the first moment, it was just a political thing to create unity in the Römischen Reich of Karl the Großen, Charlemagne.
Thank you very much, Norbert, for revealing the secrets of notation. That's amazing. Thanks a lot, and good luck to your future projects. Thank you.
Thank you.